After 23 adoption agencies rejected me for alleged anger issues, I uncovered that my own sister had been sabotaging me behind my back. So I exposed her at her anniversary party, and she ended up in prison after 43 victims came forward. After numerous attempts to start a family, I eventually came to terms with the fact that having biological children was not in my future. My husband, Tom, had been my rock through countless disappointing test results and unsuccessful treatments. We decided to pursue adoption, and I poured all my remaining hope into the process. My older sister, Denise, already had four seemingly perfect children, a fact she never failed to remind me of. Every family gathering included remarks about her blessings and how some individuals simply weren't destined for motherhood. Yet, I persevered through her unkind comments, convinced that my future child was out there, waiting for me. The initial adoption agency rejected my application after 3 months. They cited concerns about my disposition. I was puzzled, but assumed I might have appeared overly anxious during the interviews. These things happen, right? Tom and I promptly applied to another agency. 6 months later, the second agency turned us down. They specifically mentioned issues with anger management that I knew I didn't possess. I had never experienced anger problems in my life. The social worker seemed genuinely regretful, but stated they couldn't proceed due to concerns raised during their background checks. By the third rejection, I was beginning to unravel. 5 agencies over 2 years. 5 refusals. Each one cited worries about stability, anger, or volatile conduct that bore no resemblance to me. One agency even inquired if I had a criminal record. I had never even received a speeding ticket. Denise would call after each rejection, feigning concern. "Oh, dear, perhaps it's just not meant to be. Parenting is quite challenging, after all. You do get stressed so easily. Remember when you raised your voice at my children last Christmas?" I had only raised my voice once. Her son had deliberately spilled juice on my laptop while laughing. But according to Denise, I had suffered a complete breakdown and traumatized her children. Maybe we're simply not meant to be parents, Tom suggested one evening as I wept into my pillow. His words cut deep because I was starting to believe them. What was so fundamentally wrong with me that every agency deemed me unfit? We explored international adoption, private adoption, and foster-to-adopt programs. Every single time, mysterious issues would emerge during the final stages. I began to think I was cursed. Everything shifted when I encountered Sandra at a coffee shop near my workplace. She had been the social worker from our very first agency. She recognized me and appeared visibly uncomfortable. After some awkward small talk, she leaned in close. "I shouldn't be telling you this," she whispered, glancing around nervously. "But someone has been repeatedly contacting agencies about you. They claim to be a concerned family member." My blood ran cold. "What did they say?" "That you have anger issues. That you've been violent with children. They knew personal details about your life. I thought you deserved to know." That night, I hired a private investigator named Marcus. I depleted my savings to pay his retainer. If someone was sabotaging my dream of motherhood, I needed proof. Tom thought I was being paranoid, but I was certain someone was behind this. 3 weeks later, Marcus called me. "You need to sit down for this," he said. The truth shattered me. Denise had made 23 calls to various adoption agencies over 2 years. She had impersonated a concerned sister, a neighbor, even a former coworker. She fabricated elaborate stories about me throwing furniture, screaming at her children, and experiencing mental breakdowns. Marcus possessed phone records, recordings from agencies that kept them, and signed statements from workers who recalled the calls. My own sister had systematically destroyed my chances at motherhood because she couldn't tolerate the idea of me having what she possessed. Their 20th anniversary party was held at the country club. Denise wore a silver dress and continuously spoke about her blessings. I waited until the speeches commenced. Then I rose with my folder of evidence. "I have something to say about family," I began, my voice steady despite my trembling hands. "For 3 years, I've tried to adopt a child. 23 adoption agencies rejected me. They all stated I had anger issues and stability concerns." Denise's face turned pale. Her husband, Robert, looked bewildered. Imagine my astonishment when I discovered someone had been calling these agencies. Someone who claimed to be worried about me. Someone who told lies about violence and mental breakdowns that never occurred. I pulled out the phone records. 23 calls, Denise. You made 23 calls to destroy my dreams of being a mother. I have the recordings. I have the evidence, and my lawyer has filed a lawsuit for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The room was utterly silent. Robert stared at his wife in horror. "Denise, tell me this isn't true." But Denise's guilty expression revealed everything. Robert slowly stood up, his voice cracking. 20 years of marriage, and I never knew I was married to someone who could be this cruel. I want a divorce. That's when Denise started laughing. It wasn't a normal laugh. It was high-pitched and fractured, like glass shattering in slow motion. Her perfectly manicured hands gripped the edge of the table as she doubled over, tears streaming down her face. The entire ballroom watched in stunned silence as my sister completely unraveled. I stood frozen, the folder of evidence still clutched in my hands. This was not the reaction I had anticipated. Rage, denial, perhaps even tears of shame, but not this manic laughter that made the hair on my neck stand up. Robert took a step back from his wife, his face cycling through confusion, horror, and disgust. Their children sat at the family table, watching their mother with wide, frightened eyes. The youngest, barely 6, began to cry. Marcus had cautioned me about this possibility during our final meeting. He had pushed a second folder across his desk, one I hadn't requested. Inside were records of other incidents, small things at first, a neighbor's missing cat that Denise had found and returned for praise, a co-worker's promotion that fell through after anonymous complaints, a friend's wedding venue that mysteriously double-booked after Denise learned she wouldn't be maid of honor. The laughter finally ceased. Denise straightened up, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her mascara into dark streaks. She looked around the room at the horrified faces of our extended family, our parents' friends, her husband's business associates. Then her gaze locked onto mine. "You always were too sensitive," she said, her voice eerily calm now. "Just like when we were children. Remember when you cried because your goldfish died? You carried on for weeks. Mom had to buy you 3 more before you stopped moping around the house. I remembered I was 7. The goldfish hadn't just died. I had found it floating in bleach water, but I had never been able to prove anything." "That's enough, Denise." Our mother stood up from her table, her voice shaking. She had been silent through my revelation, but something in Denise's tone had finally broken through her shock. "We're leaving now. Sit down, Mother." Denise's voice cracked like a whip. "My baby sister wanted to make a scene at my anniversary party. Let's give her the attention she's always craved." She turned back to me, taking a step closer. Robert grabbed her arm, but she shook him off without even looking at him. Her focus was entirely on me, and for the first time in my life, I was genuinely afraid of my own sister. 23 calls, she said, mirroring my earlier tone. "Do you want to know why I made 23 calls? Because that's how many times you've ruined something for me. 23 times throughout our lives when you just had to exist and make everything about you." I opened my mouth to respond, but she kept going, her voice rising with each word. "When you were born, suddenly, I wasn't Daddy's special girl anymore. When you started school, teachers compared me to their sweet little angel. When you got married, everyone said how beautiful you looked, how Tom was so lucky. No one remembered that I'd gotten married the year before." The room was so quiet. I could hear the air conditioning humming overhead. Even the wait staff had frozen in place, trays of champagne forgotten. "But children," she continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Children were mine. The one thing I could do that you couldn't. For perfect babies while you cried into your pillow every month. Finally, something that was just mine. They're not trophies," I managed to say, my voice barely steady. "They're human beings." She laughed again, shorter this time. "You would have been a terrible mother anyway. Look at you hiring a private investigator, plotting revenge, making a scene. Is this the behavior of someone who should raise a child?" The word stung because part of me had wondered the same thing. In my darkest moments, lying awake at night, I had questioned whether the universe was trying to tell me something, whether Denise had simply vocalized what fate already knew. Tom appeared at my side, his hand finding mine. I hadn't even seen him move from his seat. "We're leaving," he said quietly. "You've said what you needed to say." But Denise wasn't finished. She grabbed a champagne flute from a nearby table and raised it high. "A toast," she called out, her voice bright and brittle. "To family, to honesty, to sisters who know each other's deepest truths." She emptied the champagne in one gulp and hurled the glass against the wall. It shattered, sending fragments across the polished floor. Several people gasped. A child started crying. "Denise, stop." Robert's voice was firm now, the shock giving way to anger. "You're embarrassing yourself. You're embarrassing our children." She spun to face him, and for a moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Fear, regret, but it was gone so quickly I couldn't be sure. "Our children," she repeated. "Our 4 beautiful children." Well, Denise just went from suburban soccer mom to supervillain faster than you can say family therapy. 23 calls to ruin her sister's adoption chances. That's dedication to being awful that even telemarketers would find impressive. "Tell me, Robert, do you know why I won it for? Why I insisted we keep trying after the 3rd? Robert's face had gone gray. He glanced at their children, then back at his wife. "Not here," he said. "Not like this." But Denise was beyond stopping. The perfect facade she'd maintained for 40 years was crumbling, and she seemed determined to destroy everything in the collapse. Because she always wanted to, she said, pointing at me. She used to talk about it when we were teenagers. 2 kids, a boy and a girl, the perfect little family. So, I had to have more. I had to have double. The revelation hung in the air like poison. Our cousin Lisa covered her mouth with her hand. Our elderly aunt clutched her pearls. The photographer, who had been hired to capture the perfect anniversary celebration, slowly lowered his camera. I felt Tom's hand tighten around mine. All those years of trying, of hoping, of having my dreams crushed over and over, and it had all been some sick competition I didn't even know I was part of. The calls were easy, Denise continued, her voice taking on an almost dreamy quality. I knew everything about you. Your work schedule, your habits, your fears. I knew exactly what to say to make them doubt you. Too emotional, too unstable, too angry. Everything I said you were, they believed. Because I made it sound so reasonable, so concerned, so loving. She picked up another champagne glass, examining it like she'd never seen one before. Do you know what the hardest part was? Watching you hope. Every time you'd get excited about a new agency, a new possibility, I'd have to watch you hope, and then I'd have to take it away again. Why? The word came out of me broken, barely a whisper. Why would you do this to me? She looked at me then, truly looked at me, and for just a moment, I saw my sister, not the monster she'd revealed herself to be, but the girl who had taught me to ride a bike, who had helped me with my homework, who had held my hair back when I got food poisoning at summer camp. Because I could, she said simply. Because every time Mom and Dad looked at you with pride, every time someone said how smart you were, how kind, how special, a little piece of me died. And I wanted you to know how that felt. The silence that followed was deafening. Then from the back of the room came the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps. Our father, who had been sitting in shocked silence through the entire confrontation, made his way to the center of the room. At 75, he moved carefully, but his back was straight and his eyes were clear. He stopped between us, looking first at me, then at Denise. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, but filled with a sadness I'd never heard before. I failed you both, he said. Somewhere along the way, I failed as a father. And I'm sorry. Denise's face crumpled. For the first time since her manic laughter, she looked genuinely vulnerable. Daddy, she started, but he held up his hand. No more, he said. This ends tonight. Denise, you need help. Professional help. And until you get it, you're not welcome in our home. The words hit Denise like a physical blow. She staggered back, bumping into a chair. You're choosing her? She asked, her voice small and broken. After everything, you're choosing her? I'm choosing peace, he said. I'm choosing healing for all of us. Robert had gathered their children, ushering them toward the exit. The youngest was crying openly now, the older ones looking shell-shocked as they passed. Robert paused beside me. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I should have seen it. I should have known. I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault that Denise had fooled all of us, but the words wouldn't come. He nodded as if he understood and continued toward the door, his family in tow. The rest of the guests began to file out, murmuring among themselves. Some shot me sympathetic looks, others seemed scandalized by the entire display. Our mother appeared at our father's side, her face streaked with tears. We should go, she said softly. All of us. This isn't the place for any more of this. But Denise wasn't ready to leave. She stood in the middle of the emptying ballroom, her silver dress wrinkled, her makeup ruined, looking nothing like the perfect sister she'd always pretended to be. You have no idea what you've done, she said, her voice low and dangerous. You think you've won? You think exposing me changes anything? You still don't have children. You still can't have what I have. I know, I said. And surprisingly, I meant it. But at least now I know why. At least now I can move forward without wondering what's wrong with me. She laughed, but it was hollow this time. Move forward. You're 38 years old. Do you really think agencies will work with you now after all this drama? After you've proven you're exactly as unstable as I said you were? The doubt crept in again, insidious and familiar. She saw it on my face and smiled. A cruel twist of her lips. That's right, she said. Think about it. Who's going to give a baby to someone who hired a private investigator to stalk their own sister? Who stands up at a family party and airs dirty laundry? Who creates this kind of scene? Tom stepped forward, putting himself partially between us. That's enough, he said. We're leaving. As we turned to go, Denise called out one last time. You know what the funny thing is? I didn't even have to lie that much. You were too sensitive. You do get stressed easily. You would have been overwhelmed by motherhood. I just helped everyone else see what I've always known. I stopped at the doorway, my hand on the frame. Everything in me wanted to turn around, to have the last word, to hurt her the way she'd hurt me. But I could feel Tom's steady presence beside me. Could see my parents waiting in the hallway. could sense the weight of all those watching eyes. So I kept walking. The hallway outside the ballroom stretched endlessly before us. Tom's hand remained firmly in mine as we walked past the coat check, through the lobby, and into the parking garage. My parents followed silently behind us. None of us spoke until we reached our cars. My mother approached me then, her face etched with lines I'd never noticed before. She pulled me into a tight embrace, her body shaking with suppressed sobs. My father stood beside us, his hand on my shoulder, squeezing gently. They didn't need to say anything. Their actions spoke volumes about whose side they'd chosen. Tom drove us home in silence. I stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past, my mind racing through everything that had just happened. The evidence folder sat in my lap, its weight both comforting and devastating. Proof of my sister's betrayal, but also proof that I'd had to hire a private investigator to uncover it. Once home, I collapsed onto our couch while Tom made tea. My phone buzzed incessantly with messages from family members who'd witnessed the confrontation. I turned it off without reading any of them. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Tonight, I just needed to process what had happened. The next morning arrived too quickly. Tom had already left for work when I woke, leaving a note saying he'd handle things at his office so I could take the day off. I made coffee and sat at our kitchen table, staring at the folder Marcus had compiled. There was so much more evidence I hadn't even shown at the party. My phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. I answered on the third ring. He asked if I was okay, having heard about the confrontation from a contact who'd been catering the event. Then he dropped a bombshell. He'd continued investigating after delivering his initial findings, following a hunch. What he discovered went beyond the adoption sabotage. Marcus arrived at my house an hour later with a new folder. Inside were bank statements, credit reports, and documentation showing that Denise had been systematically destroying more than just my adoption chances. She'd been using my social security number for years, opening credit cards, taking out small loans, always paying them just late enough to damage my credit score, but not late enough to trigger fraud alerts. The pattern was meticulous. Every financial hit coincided with major life events. When Tom and I got engaged, she'd opened a credit card in my name and made several late payments. When we bought our house, she'd applied for multiple store cards using my information, triggering hard credit inquiries that lowered my score. The adoption agencies hadn't just been checking criminal records and references. They'd been looking at financial stability, too. I spent the afternoon at my bank filing fraud reports and freezing my credit. The bank manager, a kind woman named Patricia, walked me through the process of disputing the fraudulent accounts. She'd seen this before, she said, though rarely between family members. The betrayal always cut deeper when it came from someone you trusted. Tom came home early, finding me surrounded by paperwork at the dining room table. He took one look at the new evidence and sank into a chair beside me. We worked together organizing everything, building a timeline of Denise's actions. The scope of her campaign was staggering. 3 days passed before I heard from Denise again. Not directly, of course. She was too clever for that. Instead, she worked through our cousin Lisa, who called asking if we could all meet for coffee to work things out. I declined politely but firmly. There was nothing to work out. The damage was done. But Denise wasn't finished. If she couldn't manipulate me directly, she'd work through others. Our extended family began choosing sides, most of them siding with whoever they'd heard from first. Denise had always been adept at spinning stories, and now she was in overdrive. According to the version spreading through our family, I was having a mental breakdown. What makes someone plan something so detailed for years? Denise didn't just make a few calls. She used her sister's social security number, opened credit cards, timed everything perfectly. The stress of infertility had driven me to paranoia. I'd hired a shady private investigator to dig up dirt on my own sister. I'd ruined her anniversary party with baseless accusations. Some relatives even heard that I'd been institutionalized, though they couldn't agree on which hospital. My parents stood firm in their support, which only fueled Denise's narrative. She told anyone who would listen that I'd turned our parents against her, that I'd always been the manipulative one. She painted herself as the victim of a jealous sister's vendetta. The calls started coming to my workplace. Anonymous complaints about my professionalism, my stability, my fitness for my job. My boss thankfully recognized the pattern and refused to take them seriously, but the stress was mounting. Denise might not be able to stop me from adopting anymore, but she was determined to destroy everything else in my life. Marcus suggested documenting everything, every call, every rumor, every action Denise took. Build a harassment case, he said. But I hesitated. Despite everything, some part of me still couldn't believe we'd reached this point. This was my sister, the person who had taught me to tie my shoes, who had walked me to school on my first day. 2 weeks after the party, Robert showed up at my door. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and stubble covering his usually clean-shaven face. He'd moved out of their house, he explained, staying with his brother while he figured out next steps. The children were with him, confused and hurting. He'd come to apologize again and to share information. In packing his things, he'd found journals, years of them, hidden in Denise's craft room. They detailed not just her actions against me, but against anyone she perceived as a threat. Friends who'd gotten promotions she wanted, neighbors whose homes were nicer. Even their children's teachers who'd praised other students too much. Robert left the journals with me, reading them that night with Tom beside me. I finally understood the depth of my sister's pathology. Entry after entry revealed a woman consumed by comparison, by competition, by an insatiable need to be superior, and I'd been her primary target since birth. The custody battle began almost immediately. Denise, true to form, painted Robert as an unfit father who'd abandoned his family. She filed emergency motions claiming he'd kidnapped their children. She accused him of abuse, of affairs, of financial crimes. The same playbook she'd used against me now turned on him. Robert asked if I'd testify on his behalf. Of course, I agreed. We were allies now, united by our shared experience of Denise's manipulation. His lawyer, a sharp woman named Catherine, built a strong case using the evidence Marcus had gathered, plus the journals Robert had found. Meanwhile, Denise escalated her campaign against me. She created social media accounts in my name, posting inflammatory content to make me look unstable. She sent messages to Tom's colleagues, warning them about his dangerous wife. She even contacted the few adoption agencies we hadn't applied to yet, ensuring they'd reject us if we tried. Each action was carefully calculated to avoid crossing into clearly illegal territory. Denise had always been intelligent, and she knew exactly how far she could push without facing legal consequences. It was exhausting, like playing chess against someone who kept changing the rules. My workplace became a battleground. Denise would call during important meetings, forcing me to silence my phone. She'd send flowers with cards containing veiled threats. She'd have food delivered during client presentations, always with notes that seemed innocent to others, but carried deeper meaning for me. Tom and I installed security cameras after finding our garden destroyed one morning. The footage showed nothing, but I knew Denise had been there. The destruction was too targeted, too specific. Every plant I'd mentioned loving on social media had been uprooted. Every garden decoration Tom had given me was smashed. Our neighbors began avoiding us. The drama was too much, too public. Who could blame them? Nobody wanted to get caught in the crossfire of what was clearly an escalating family war. Our once friendly street became cold and watchful. Marcus continued investigating, uncovering more evidence of Denise's past manipulations. He found former friends who'd been driven away by mysterious rumors, co-workers who'd left jobs after anonymous complaints, a pattern spanning decades, all leading back to my sister. The breaking point came when Denise targeted Tom's job directly. She called his company's HR department, claiming to be a concerned citizen who'd witnessed him embezzling funds. The accusation was baseless, easily disproven, but it triggered an internal investigation that put Tom's career on hold. Watching my husband's face as he told me about the investigation was devastating. He'd been nothing but supportive throughout this ordeal, and now Denise was punishing him for standing by me. The guilt was overwhelming. I'd brought this chaos into his life. That night, we made a decision. We would fight back, but strategically. No more defensive moves. It was time to go on the offensive. We hired our own lawyer, a colleague of Catherine's, who specialized in harassment cases. Together with Marcus's evidence and Robert's journals, we built a comprehensive case showing Denise's pattern of behavior, not just against me, but against multiple victims over many years. The lawyer suggested reaching out to others Denise had targeted. Strengthen numbers, she said. So I did. I contacted the former friends, the ex-co-workers, the neighbors who'd moved away. Many didn't want to get involved, but some were eager to finally have their stories heard. A support group formed organically. We met weekly at a community center, sharing our experiences and evidence. There was Sarah, whose wedding Denise had nearly ruined with lies about the groom. There was Michael, whose promotion had been derailed by anonymous complaints. There was Jennifer, whose small business had failed after a mysterious campaign of negative reviews. Together, we pieced together the full picture of Denise's decades-long pattern of destruction. The evidence was overwhelming, but more importantly, we found healing and shared experience. We weren't crazy. We weren't paranoid. We'd all been targeted by the same person for the crime of achieving something Denise wanted. Denise must have learned about our meetings because the harassment intensified. Dead animals appeared on doorsteps. Tires were slashed. Anonymous letters arrived at workplaces. But now it wasn't just me. She was targeting everyone in the group, spreading herself thin. That was her first mistake. The second was targeting someone with connections she didn't know about. Jennifer's husband worked in cybersecurity and had been quietly documenting the digital harassment. He traced the fake social media accounts, the anonymous emails, the negative reviews, all back to IP addresses associated with Denise. We had her. The group decided to act together. We would all file restraining orders simultaneously, presenting our evidence to show a clear pattern of harassment. The coordinated legal action would be impossible to dismiss as individual vendettas. The night before we filed, I couldn't sleep. Tom held me as I stared at the ceiling, wondering how we'd gotten here. Somewhere in another life, Denise and I were sisters who loved each other. But that life felt like a fantasy now. Morning came with unexpected news. Robert called, his voice shaking. Denise had been arrested, not for anything we'd done, but for attempting to break into his brother's house where he and the children were staying. She'd been caught on security cameras trying to jimmy a window at 3 a.m. The arrest was the catalyst for everything that followed. With Denise in custody, even temporarily, people felt safe to come forward. More victims emerged. The scope of her actions over the years was staggering. Financial fraud, identity theft, harassment, stalking, the list went on. Our lawyer called an emergency meeting. With Denise's arrest, our civil cases would likely be put on hold pending criminal proceedings. But this was good news. Criminal charges carried more weight than restraining orders. Real consequences were finally possible. I visited my parents that evening. They'd aged years in the weeks since the anniversary party. My mother clutched my hand as she told me about Denise's childhood, about signs they'd missed or dismissed, the dead pets they'd assumed were accidents, the friends who'd suddenly stopped coming over, the teachers who'd seemed to inexplicably dislike her. My father was quieter, staring into his coffee cup as he spoke about his failures as a parent, how he'd favored me without realizing it, how he'd dismissed Denise's concerning behaviors as phases. The guilt was eating him alive. I tried to comfort them, but what could I say? We were all victims of Denise's manipulation, but they carried the added burden of parental responsibility. They'd created her, raised her, enabled her without meaning to. The weight of that knowledge was crushing. Tom and I returned to the adoption agency where Sandra worked, the one that had started this journey of discovery. We weren't ready to begin the process again. Not yet, but we wanted to clear the record. Sandra was sympathetic, promising to note the circumstances in our file for when we were ready to try again. Walking out of that agency, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope, small and fragile, but real. Denise's interference had been documented and acknowledged. The path to adoption wasn't closed forever. The criminal case against Denise proceeded slowly. She'd been released on bail with conditions including no contact with any of the victims. She was staying with a friend from her book club, one of the few people still willing to believe her version of events. Denise really turned stalking into a full-time job with overtime pay, dead animals, fake accounts, and garden destruction. That's dedication to being the worst sister ever. But even that relationship strained as more evidence came to light. The friend called me one day apologizing for doubting our stories. She'd caught Denise using her computer to create more fake accounts, violating her bail conditions. The friend had kicked her out immediately. With nowhere else to go, Denise reached out to our parents. They refused to take her in, maintaining the boundary our father had set at the anniversary party. She needed help, they said, but enabling her wasn't helping. The preliminary hearing arrived on a gray Thursday morning. I sat in the courthouse hallway with Tom, Robert, and several other victims. We didn't speak much, each lost in our own thoughts about facing Denise again. When we entered the courtroom, Denise was already there with her lawyer. She looked smaller, somehow diminished. Her perfect appearance had cracked. Her hair was unstyled. Her clothes wrinkled, but her eyes still held that familiar, calculating look. The prosecutor laid out the charges methodically: identity theft, fraud, harassment, stalking, criminal mischief. The list seemed endless. With each charge, Denise's lawyer's face grew more grim. This wasn't going to be easy to defend. When the judge asked how she pleaded, Denise stood. For a moment, I thought she might actually take responsibility, but then she spoke, her voice clear and defiant. Not guilty on all charges. The courtroom erupted in whispers. After everything, all the evidence, she was still playing the victim, still refusing to acknowledge what she'd done. It was exactly what I should have expected, but somehow I'd hoped for more. As we filed out after the hearing, Denise caught my eye. She smiled. That same cruel twist of lips from the anniversary party. This wasn't over. She would fight every charge, drag out every proceeding, make this as painful as possible for everyone involved. But something had changed in me. The smile didn't wound like it once would have. I had Tom. I had my parents. I had a community of survivors who understood. And most importantly, I had the truth. The war with my sister wasn't ending anytime soon. But for the first time since this all began, I knew I could win it. The days following the hearing blurred together. I threw myself into organizing the evidence we'd collected, creating detailed timelines, and cross-referencing every incident. Tom helped me convert our spare bedroom into a makeshift office, installing filing cabinets and a large corkboard where I could visualize the connections between Denise's various schemes. Marcus called with updates every few days. He'd uncovered more victims willing to testify, including a former colleague of Denise's who'd lost a promotion after anonymous complaints about her work ethic. The woman had kept meticulous records, suspecting sabotage, but never having proof until now. Robert's custody battle intensified. Denise filed motion after motion, each more desperate than the last. She claimed he was coaching the children to lie about her, that he'd hidden assets, that he had a secret gambling addiction. Catherine, his lawyer, methodically dismantled each accusation with evidence and witness statements. I attended one of Robert's custody hearings as a character witness. Denise sat across the courtroom, her appearance increasingly disheveled. When I took the stand to describe what I'd witnessed over the years, she stared at me with such intensity that the bailiff shifted closer to her table. The judge ordered a psychological evaluation for both parents. Robert agreed immediately. Denise's lawyer requested multiple postponements, claiming scheduling conflicts and health issues. The pattern was familiar: delay, deflect, deny. Our support group continued meeting weekly. New members joined as word spread through whispered conversations and careful referrals. A teacher whose classroom supplies kept mysteriously disappearing after she'd won Teacher of the Year over Denise's friend. A neighbor whose prize-winning roses had died after Denise complimented them at a block party. Jennifer's husband made a breakthrough in his digital investigation. He'd found evidence that Denise had been using public Wi-Fi at various coffee shops and libraries to cover her tracks. Security footage from one location showed her hunched over a laptop, creating the fake social media accounts she'd used to harass us. The footage was grainy but recognizable. More importantly, it corroborated the digital evidence with physical proof of her presence at the exact times the accounts were created. Our lawyer was ecstatic. This was the kind of concrete evidence that would be difficult to explain away. Tom's employer concluded their investigation, finding no evidence of wrongdoing. His boss apologized for the inconvenience and offered him a raise to compensate for the stress. But the damage to Tom's reputation lingered. Colleagues who'd once trusted him implicitly now seemed to second-guess his decisions. I watched my husband navigate this new reality with a grace that made me love him even more. He never complained, never suggested that supporting me had been a mistake, but I saw the toll in the way his shoulders tensed when his phone rang, the way he triple-checked every document before submitting it. Denise's bail conditions violations caught up with her. The friend who had kicked her out had reported the incident, and combined with other witnesses who'd seen her near victims' homes, the prosecutor moved to revoke her bail. The hearing was set for the following month. My parents struggled with the decision to attend. My mother changed her mind daily, torn between maternal instinct and self-preservation. My father remained firm. They would not enable Denise's behavior by showing support for her continued denials. 3 weeks before the bail hearing, Denise made a critical error. She attempted to contact me directly, leaving a voicemail on my work phone at 2 a.m. Her voice was slurred, whether from alcohol or exhaustion, I couldn't tell. She rambled about our childhood, about how I'd stolen our parents' love, about how everything was my fault. The voicemail was nearly 15 minutes long. She admitted to things we hadn't even discovered yet: sabotaging my college applications, spreading rumors about Tom before our wedding, even putting sugar in my gas tank when I'd gotten a promotion she'd wanted. Each confession was wrapped in justification, in blame, in the twisted logic of her obsession. I immediately forwarded the recording to our lawyer and the prosecutor. This was a clear violation of the no-contact order, but more importantly, it was a confession, not legally admissible for all charges perhaps, but damning nonetheless. The prosecutor played portions of the voicemail at the bail revocation hearing. Denise's lawyer tried to argue that her client had been under extreme stress, that the statements were taken out of context, but the judge had heard enough. Bail was revoked. Denise was remanded to custody until trial. The courtroom was packed with victims and their families. As the bailiff led Denise away in handcuffs, she turned to look at me one last time. The defiance was gone, replaced by something I'd never seen in my sister's eyes before: fear. Robert's children began therapy to process everything that had happened. The older ones understood more than anyone had realized. They'd noticed their mother's behavior, the way she'd talk about me, the strange phone calls she'd make. They'd been afraid to say anything, worried about making her angry. The therapist recommended family sessions for Robert and the children. I attended one session at their request, helping them understand the full scope of what had happened. The eldest, a teenager, asked me directly if her mother was a bad person. I struggled to find the right words, eventually settling on explaining that sometimes people who are hurting make choices that hurt others. Our support group evolved into something more formal. We registered as a nonprofit dedicated to helping victims of systematic harassment and manipulation. Jennifer took the lead, her business experience invaluable in setting up the organizational structure. I focused on creating resources and documentation templates for future victims. The criminal trial was set for 6 months out. The prosecutor warned us it would be a long process, that Denise's lawyer would try every tactic to delay and complicate proceedings, but we were ready. We'd waited this long for justice. We could wait a little longer. Tom and I began marriage counseling, not because our relationship was in trouble, but because we wanted to process the trauma together. Our therapist helped us navigate the complex emotions, the guilt I felt for bringing this chaos into Tom's life, his frustration at not being able to protect me from my own sister, our shared grief for the family relationships that had been destroyed. During one session, the therapist asked what we hoped to gain from the trial. Tom answered immediately, justice, vindication, protection from future harassment. But when she turned to me, I found myself struggling to articulate what I wanted. Closure, understanding, an apology I knew would never come. Marcus officially closed his investigation, having uncovered more than enough evidence for both the criminal case and the civil suits many of us were pursuing. At our final meeting, he presented me with a bound copy of his complete findings. The document was over 200 pages, detailing 2 decades of Denise's calculated cruelty. I spent days reading through it, seeing patterns I'd missed, connections I hadn't made. The scope was staggering, but what struck me most was the consistency. Every action, every scheme, every lie had been in service of the same goal, maintaining her superiority by destroying anyone who threatened it. The adoption agency, where Sandra worked, reached out. They'd been following the case and wanted to assure me that when I was ready, they would expedite my application. They'd implemented new procedures for verifying concerns raised about prospective parents, including requiring documentation and following up with multiple sources. Sandra herself called to apologize again for not doing more when she'd first suspected something was wrong. I assured her it wasn't her fault. Denise had been convincing, calculating, careful. She'd fooled dozens of professionals over the years. Robert's divorce was finalized in a quiet ceremony at the courthouse. Denise, attending in shackles and an orange jumpsuit, signed the papers without protest. She'd lost her leverage, her ability to manipulate the system. The judge awarded Robert full custody and the majority of their assets, citing Denise's criminal behavior and its impact on the children. As the months passed, life began to find a new rhythm. The constant anxiety of waiting for Denise's next attack faded, replaced by the steadier stress of legal proceedings. Tom's reputation at work slowly recovered. My parents found peace in family therapy. Robert and his children started building their new life. The trial began on a cold Tuesday morning. The courthouse was packed with victims, supporters, and media who'd been following the unusual case. The prosecutor laid out the evidence methodically: financial fraud, identity theft, harassment, stalking. 43 victims in total, spanning 22 years. Denise's defense relied heavily on mental health claims. Her lawyer painted a picture of a woman driven to desperation by childhood trauma, by postpartum depression, by a society that pitted women against each other. It was a compelling narrative, one that might have worked if not for the sheer volume of evidence showing calculated, deliberate action over decades. I testified on the 3rd day. The prosecutor walked me through the timeline of adoption sabotage, the financial fraud, the escalating harassment. Denise watched me intently, occasionally shaking her head or whispering to her lawyer. But when I described finding the voicemail confession, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The cross-examination was brutal. Denise's lawyer questioned my motivations, suggested I'd been jealous of my sister's success, implied that I'd exaggerated or misinterpreted innocent actions, but I had the evidence. Every claim was backed by documents, recordings, witness statements. The truth was unassailable. Other victims testified over the following weeks. Sarah described how her wedding nearly fell apart. Michael detailed the promotion he'd lost. Jennifer explained how her business had been destroyed by fake reviews. Each story added another layer to the pattern of deliberate destruction. The jury deliberated for less than a day, guilty on all counts. As the verdict was read, Denise showed no emotion. She stared straight ahead, her face a mask of indifference, but I saw her hands shaking as the bailiff prepared to lead her away. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following month. Victims were invited to provide impact statements. I spent weeks writing mine. trying to capture not just what Denise had taken from me, but what her actions had revealed about the depths of human jealousy and the importance of truth. Tom and I returned to the adoption agency the day after the verdict. We were different people than we'd been 3 years ago. Scarred, but stronger, wearier, but wiser. Sandra herself handled our application, expediting where possible while ensuring every requirement was properly met. The sentencing arrived faster than expected. The judge had reviewed the victim impact statements, the evidence, the psychological evaluations. Denise stood as he read the sentence. 15 years with possibility of parole after 10. She would serve time for the financial crimes, the identity theft, the harassment. She would have years to think about what she'd done. As they led her away, Denise turned one final time. Our eyes met across the courtroom. For just a moment, I saw my sister again. Not the monster she'd become, but the girl who taught me to ride a bike. Then the moment passed, and she was gone. The next morning, Tom and I sat at our kitchen table with adoption paperwork spread before us. We filled out forms, gathered documents, prepared for interviews. The path ahead was clear now, free from invisible sabotage. Our journey to parenthood could finally begin. My phone rang. Sandra calling with good news. A birth mother had reviewed our profile and wanted to meet. As I hung up, Tom pulled me into his arms. We stood there in our kitchen, holding each other, finally able to hope without fear. The war with my sister was over. The healing could begin. What struck me most was that tiny second when they saw each other as sisters again before it all ended. Subscribe for more content just like this.